They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
All right, and we're back now with our deep dive segment here into culture jamming. I guess before even like getting up with the show notes here and screen sharing, Adam, have you ever found yourself in a situation where, you know, a meme or a viral clip actually caused you to take a moment of reflection and think about you maybe preconceived notions or a political stance or your opinion on an important subject matter?
I wouldn't go as far as saying important subject matter, but one of the things that I found very exciting, and there's actually a documentary live right now on Netflix regarding this, but was the GameStop situation. And watching some of the memes around that were coming out regarding, diamond handing and these guys all working together, and some of the sort of memes that were created around the Wall Street Bets pages. It really made me think about the stock market, how wealth is organized around hedge funds and stuff like that. And just like the power of memes to actually organize so many people together for a common cause, I found to be extremely powerful. And so I think that's one of the more recent examples I can think about.
Yeah, I definitely, I'll take a step further and say that definitely memes and viral clips have sometimes caused me to have that pattern interrupt where I've probably already had my stated position, my preconceived notions, and suddenly it causes you to really take a moment and think about something, right? And I won't get too deep into this political subject matter or else we'll never get into culture jamming. But with the subject matter of abortion, right? Like in my 20s, I was very on the pro-choice side of the equation, but I've honestly, through memes and different little video clips, found myself drifting far more towards the pro-life position. And again, that's a very nuanced subject matter that we'll maybe do a deep dive in a future episode. But one other subject matter that's really evolved, and I found memes extremely effective for, you know, just causing me to sit back and reflect, is Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin maxis, right, or the cyber hornets of Bitcoin, you know, whatever you kind of want to frame that culture as, I think that they crush it when it comes to memes. And in fact, I think there's a very simple slogan that we almost see these days hijack even part of the Canadian political process through Pierre Poilievre, which is fix the money, fix the world. And I think that even looking back to 2008 and the Ron Paul revolution, right, which eventually kind of became the Tea Party. And I know it eventually got co-opted, in my opinion, by bad actors. But it was through memes that I think Ron Paul really rose to prominence, right? It was this idea that there was this straight shooter in politics. I literally think he's probably the only living politician that I truly believe almost everything he says and that he believes it as well. And with Bitcoin culture, it feels very similar, where there's these Bitcoin memes that really just cause you to sit back and like, you know, it's very easy to get caught up, especially, you know, a few months ago or a year ago in the hype cycle that is and was Web3 and NFTs and other things that maybe, you know, Bitcoin Maxi would refer to as shit coins or scams or Ponzi's. And I think that through memes, Bitcoiners are actually much more effective in potentially causing individuals to sit back and reflect versus a 1,000 word or 10,000 word essay or novella. Because I think for a lot of us, sadly, and I include myself to a certain extent in this category, we don't necessarily seek out information until we've already started to convince ourselves to go out and seek out that information to confirm our inherent biases. So if you already have a stated position or belief, I think it's very easy to struggle to ever seek out new information. And I think that one of the best pattern interrupts, one of the easiest ways to do that is through meme culture, is through viral video clips, is by essentially, distorting what was perceived as noise into signal.
Now, Matt, you're a fellow Canadian and you grew up, similar time to me. Do you recall the very viral video on Canadian television that was the House Hippos
Yeah, the
commercial?
moment you even just said you're Canadian, I was like, he's going to bring up house hippos.
Yeah, I want to see if anybody else remembers House Hippos. And that's one of the things from my childhood that I vividly remember. And I think one of the interesting things about memes is how well it sticks in your brain, right? An illustration of a point that you weren't necessarily expecting is so fascinating. This idea of House Hippos, and for anybody that doesn't remember, it was a brilliantly produced commercial about these tiny hippos that would live in your house, and they were going around and eating crumbs off of the counter, or they
And
were,
they were essentially the size of a mouse, right? And there's
yeah,
literally like they produced videos that showed these little hippos scurrying around your house.
yeah, and they were hiding under the couch and things like that. And as a child, it was so enthralling. I mean, you got captivated by this tiny thing, and it was actually believable because of how they made it so much like a mouse, right? They made it do mouse activities. And of course, by the end of it, you're like, wow, this is such an incredible thing. Mom, our house hippo is real. But really, what that commercial was actually about was censorship, and the idea that like we should actually censor certain things from being promoted to children and promoted to people that don't really have the cognitive ability to understand what's going on. And so that whole commercial was actually just about how easy it is to trick your mind and how easy it would be to trick younger kids and things like that. So I really I have that vividly painted in my mind, and I really wanted to bring that up because of how memorable the experience is, because it was so counterculture, or like so counter to anything I was expecting at the time.
And I don't remember exactly the way they framed it, but there was like a catchphrase or a tagline they had at the end of the video, which was "Not everything you see on TV can be trusted." And so, just for anyone that's kind of curious, maybe you're not a Canadian, there's a little screenshot there of the house hippo. You can see like, I don't know, a dog or a cat's food bowl in the background, and it was a very engaging, well put together video. And I believe it was produced by the Canadian government on CBC, if my memory serves me correctly. And it really was a great pattern interrupt, right? Because in Canada, especially, and it's kind of ironic now because literally we've got the government saying, like, trust no other news source but us. But there was a time when people actually really wanted to make sure that they were telling the truth and not pushing a narrative. And, compared to, I bet if you were to poll the average Canadian, there's a greater chance they remember house hippos than one of those historical moments, right? We had like different types of like, arguably propaganda pushed on us as Canadians through our government media sources. And like there was all these different, again, well produced videos that would talk about, how Canada was founded or this battle or this other thing. And looking at like important historical moments. I suspect far more Canadians remember house hippos because it was kind of like a viral video, a viral meme before that was really a commonplace term. And so, fantastic example there, Adam. All right. Well, let's switch gears and actually get into the subject matter of today's show because I believe culture jamming is extremely important. In this segment, I want to explore with you guys kind of the definition of memes, the definition of culture jamming. We'll touch a little bit on the history, but we won't actually have time to go through this entire 2,000 word essay I kind of put together here. But if you guys want to do a deep dive, I really encourage you. Go subscribe to us on Substack. You can subscribe for free. Right now, we're putting out all our content for free on Substack. Maybe eventually we'll roll out a paywall, but you can literally read this entire article for free. All you need to do is go and hit us up on Substack. There'll be links in the video description down below. But signal or noise, culture jamming. Can memes change the world? And in my opinion, spoiler alert, they absolutely can. In fact, I think it's one of the best ways to be able to influence politics is to first influence the culture. I think one of the easiest ways to influence the culture is to approach things through a meme or viral clip approach. So today we're going to be exploring culture jamming, memes, Banksy, fake news, rapping nurses, teachers with giant prosthetic breasts, and how to effectively navigate the current culture wars. And let's quickly just touch upon the history of culture jamming. So it's not a clear-cut term, and it's kind of vague these days in regards to what people apply culture jamming to. But originally, and like any sort of term, right, it's malleable as culture evolves. But it can normally be viewed as a protest or commentary on a dominant cultural force, right? Or something going against the mainstream narrative, right? Something that's going against the orthodoxy of the day, just like that house video clip did. Because so often, especially like in the 90s growing up, when you watch TV, it was easy just to assume, to believe whatever TV was put in front of you. And that's why things like the House Hippo were such a pattern interrupt for the average Canadian. Now, the term originates with Don Joyce, who was a musician and coined the term in 1984, pulling the concept from radio jamming, which is deliberate jamming, blocking, or interference with radio communications. And the idea here with culture jamming was that you're going purposely disrupt the perceived or mainstream culture or narrative at the time. Um, so essentially, when we're kind of viewing this, think of it as a parody highlighting the absurd aspects of mainstream culture, pointing out the hypocrisy while making a social commentary, but also doing it in kind of an innovative way. So, an awareness of how the media environment, this is a direct quote from Don, as awareness of how the media environment we occupy affects and directs our inner life grows, some resist. The skillful reworked billboard directs the public viewer to a consideration of the original corporate strategy. The studio for the culture jammer is the world at large. Um, so typical forms of culture jamming, particularly like originally, was things like media hoaxing, corporate sabotage, billboard liberation, and trademark infringement. And memes are likely, in my opinion, these days, the most prevalent form of modern day culture jamming. So I want to go on a little bit of a tangent here, if you guys will indulge me, about memes, because I'd honestly never really thought about memes. I thought they were funny pictures that, usually made you chuckle. But when I read the book, The Selfish Gene, I started to interpret memes on a whole different level. And so if you guys haven't read the Richard Dawkins book, The Selfish Gene, absolutely recommend you check it out. You've read that, right, Adam?
I actually have not read that
Dude,
book.
you have to read this book. It's so good. And it just, I guess it, to me, it showed and laid out these really large patterns in life and explains things in a manner that I don't think that you're going to be exposed to without reading the book. So I want to highlight here a quote from The Selfish Gene, second edition, 1989. Memes are condensed images that stimulate visual, verbal, musical, or behavior associations that people can easily imitate and transmit to others. And so, like, just high level, my big takeaway when reading The Selfish Gene was this concept that, like, humans, right, we're this selfish gene, or our genes are selfish and they want to reproduce. But the same thing holds true for ideas, right? An idea that doesn't naturally make you want to share it or spread it or reinterpret and spread it is going to die off because there's no catalyst there for you to want to share it. So something very mundane or whatever, like milk is white. No, there's no real reason for you to want to go share that with friends or family. But something like the house hippo is something that will actually like trigger you to want, have you guys seen this clip? This is wild. This is silly. But at the same time, the message behind that meme or that viral clip gets exposed to the individuals you're sharing. And so ideas that are more viral or more meme centric are naturally going to get spread faster and further in our culture. So Dawkins likened the process by which memes survive and change through the evolution of culture to the natural selection of genes and biological evolution. Memes are easily digestible, shareable, and trigger four key emotions for social change: shock, shame, fear, and anger. And again, when you think about the most effective memes that you've probably ever been exposed to, it probably involves something like shock, shame, fear, or anger that it triggered in you, right? Some of the best memes, in my opinion, at first, I think that I'm supposed to take it at face value, be like, how can this person be so stupid? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, take a step back here. Oh, I think that this is actually like a put on, right? Like they're actually trying to get me to react this way. And it gets you thinking about the subject matter when maybe otherwise you would just assume that that's noise, right? Like I'm not going to really pay attention to that. And we're going to get into some fantastic examples later on in the show, particularly around who one of the greats, in my opinion, when it comes to culture jamming. I think Alex Stein is literally doing it unlike anyone else right now in our culture. But going a little bit further on, and this is another quote from the book, but if you contribute to the world's culture, if you have a good idea, it may live on, intact long after your gene evolved in the common pool. Socrates may or may not have a gene or two alive in the world today. As G.C. Williams has remarked, but who cares? The meme complexes of Socrates, Leonardo, Cuniparus and Marconi are still going strong. And that actually, again, honestly sort of changed my interpretation of reality when I first was exposed to this idea, because I was like, oh shit, yeah, there isn't just like your genetic legacy. There's also arguably your intellectual or your meme legacy, right? Like the ideas or the evolution of ideas that you help contribute to. And again, I think it's really easy to take memes at surface value and think of them as silly pictures that you're supposed to just laugh at. But in fact, they're distilling down oftentimes relatively complex concepts that might take paragraphs, or a book in order to explain. And they're, one, trusting in the consumer to be able to interpret it, but two, creating a version of that idea that becomes so much more easy for you to spread and share. And that's how these ideas really go to live on. For Callie Lazin, one of the founders of Adbusters, and maybe you guys remember Adbusters, maybe you don't, but they were one of like the OG culture jammers where they were constantly approaching and kind of, mocking, reinterpreting intellectual property, trademarks, and corporate slogans and things of that nature. But in her opinion, the best culture jam is one that introduced a meta meme, a two-level message that punctures a specific commercial image, but does so in a way that challenges some larger aspect of the political culture or corporate dominance. So the most common form, as I mentioned, of culture jamming is usually thought to be like ad parodies and billboards being defaced. And this was really popular in the 1970s. And there's honestly a really interesting rabbit hole to go down here of research. So those of you that want to understand the history of billboards being defaced and co-opted, I really encourage you to do so, because I think there's a lot we can even learn about today's meme culture from studying the past. But for example, one of the big ones here, and I've just got a little photo here that I'll try and zoom in on. But this was essentially around um, a new fragrance that I think was launched by Max Factor. Warning: a pretty face isn't safe in the city. Fight crap with self-respect. The new moisturizer by Max Factor. Sorry, I got mixed up. It was a moisturizer. But essentially, this wasn't the actual original slogan, right? People had got up on that billboard and decided fight crap with self-respect, which obviously is the exact opposite of telling you that a pretty face isn't safe in this city. So that second line there, this has been co-opted. That first line is literally part of the ad campaign, is that your pretty face isn't safe in the city because of toxins, light, whatever. So you need this moisturizer to keep your face pretty. However, the culture jammers here are saying no. The way you keep your face pretty is by actually having self-respect, rather than thinking some product is going to save you or make you a better human being. And just want to cover a couple historical examples here when it comes to culture jamming. This first one I couldn't verify, but even if it's not true, I think it illustrates well the potential behind culture jamming. So it's claimed that Michelangelo's painting the faces of his patrons as the faces of the damned in the Sistine Chapel in the 1500s. Again, this may or may not be myth, but that's a way to go about corporate jamming. Him literally taking the people that paid him a lot of money, but he sometimes disagreed with, his well-paying patrons, and finding a way to kind of subvert their images and essentially troll them. And again, I think that's a big part of culture jamming, is today we'd maybe call it trolling, but it's essentially trying to evoke a reaction from an individual, but ideally also causing them to maybe take a step back and think critically about a subject matter that they maybe otherwise never would consider. Billboard Liberation Front, this was one of the big movements that really focused on co-opting billboards. And again, I shared with you guys that original version, and that was a Billboard Liberation Front, that 1977 Max Factor ad. And then we can even look further back in time, though. And here, this is, I think, from the National Enquirer, but Alan Abel's hoax, the Society for Indecency to Naked Animals. So the war against naked animals, he aims to put pants on dogs, slips on horses, and even bikinis on cows. Now, this wasn't a legitimate claim. This person wasn't actually trying to get people to start dressing their animals in clothing, although something kind of ironic, again, that in the 21st century, everyone's got a shirt or a hat or a coat for their dog or cat. But we'll leave that for another exploration another day. But this was kind of, calling in to question a narrative at the time, that women shouldn't be wearing mini skirts, that they shouldn't be showing so much skin and things of that nature, and that was clearly adding and aiding to the degeneracy of society. Now, again, you maybe interpret today's modern society as degenerate, and maybe that did have something to do with it. But I think this was an effective way for them to troll their critics, was to essentially call out and create these interesting parallels, which again become so much more shareable than the actual mainstream narrative around it. And then let's take a quick peek at the critical theory behind culture jamming. And again, it's a fantastic article and thought code link in the uh, Substack article here that I encourage you guys to spend some time and read. But I just want to highlight here, how these memes, how this social commentary can really change society. So the practice of culture jamming is inspired by critical theory of the Frankfurt School, which focused on the power of mass media and advertising to shape and direct our norms, values, expectations, and behavior through unconscious and subconscious tactics. By subverting the image and values attached to a corporate brand, the memes deployed in culture jamming aimed to produce feelings of shock, shame, fear, and ultimately anger in the viewer, because it is the emotions that lead to social change and political action. And again, even looking back to yesterday, some of the news stories we were talking about the issues surrounding trans athletes in girls' bathrooms. And it's often not until people really understand the direct consequences, right? And sometimes through trolling, through memes, that actually highlights the issues much faster than, again, a well-researched and thought-out essay. One thing that we'll explore a little bit later on in the show is the discussion around the Trafalgar Oakville teacher here in Ontario, Canada, who's a biological male, but is literally wearing, I forget, it was something insane. Like, I think it's like, was it size Z or like some almost made up size of prosthetic breasts? And I think there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll unpack it to a certain extent in a little bit. But again, understand that I think that this triggers a much greater emotional reaction than someone trying to make a well thought out argument. And Banksy, is he a connoisseur of culture jamming? Is he maybe one of the most effective culture jammers we've ever experienced? And I want to highlight specifically one of his pieces here, Can't Beat the Feeling, which combines Mickey Mouse, Ronald McDonald with the Napalm Girl from the Terror of War photo taken by Nick Ute. And I think, oh, maybe that photo didn't load. That's too bad. But essentially, have you guys heard or seen this iconic photo before? Adam, have you been exposed to it?
I actually don't think so.
All right, I'm going to pull it up here because I think it's too important
Yeah.
to gloss over.
Yeah. Let's pull that up. But one thing, just as you're talking here and trying to find that photo, I was just thinking too of how important it is for this type of communication and memeing, because as Matt Ridley points out, a lot of our understanding is made through the concept of ideas having sex, right? And having these ideas that are often shocking and have this shock value to them is very interesting, because it just allows our brain to make different connections. So like this image that you're pulling up, I mean, that is thought provoking. And this is, I think, perhaps what Matt Ridley gets at, in that, if you've never thought of these two concepts at the same time before, like, wow, the product of this is interesting. So Matt, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, so like it's taking the Napalm Girl, right, from the Vietnam War that's running naked after her village, I think it was her village, has been attacked. And if I'm remembering my history correctly, right, she's been severely burned and she's running by herself, but it's showing Mickey Mouse and Ronald McDonald holding her hand. And now this is really just, I think, again, everyone's free to interpret art however they see fit. But in my opinion, when we're looking at this, particularly through what I believe Banksy was trying to highlight for us, was understanding that these giant corporations, these multinational corporations, are often going to provide a certain social commentary, right? That like maybe they don't or whatever, but they're still oftentimes profiting off the backs of individuals in third world countries. So the piece highlights the multinational corporations who exploit less developed countries, which often have little or no laws around child labor, health and safety standards, and minimum wage. It highlights corporations' subtle conquest of the economies of less developed countries. So just because we don't go in with guns blazing these days in order to essentially conquer a society, a region, or a country, oftentimes through corporations, we're able to achieve that. And I think that you're even seeing that with the Silk Road 2.0 these days with China, right? With the CCP party creating these trade deals with African nations where it's often putting them in a level of debt or a situation where they end up having to literally hand over, say, like their national airport or major infrastructure projects in their country, which essentially causes them to be indebted sometimes permanently, to the Chinese, to the CCP party, which really puts them at a disadvantage to be able to continue to develop into potentially, first world or modern power. And then looking through modern examples of culture jamming, and this is one that I have a strong opinion on. I'd love to get your thoughts, Adam. Quick before I even explore the subject matter, what's your hot take when someone manipulates a media headline? Right, I'm sure you've seen it once or twice before, but someone goes in and they maybe edit a few keywords and then reshare the video. One really popular one right now that you've probably seen on Twitter is this video of a bunch of people in body bags, and then there's a tagline at the bottom that says, 159 or 160 people killed in most recent conflict in Ukraine with Russia. And then it shows someone literally like moving in the body bag. And there's all this political outrage around it. Well, spoiler alert, that's not actually a real headline and that's not a real news clip. That's actually from a previous point in time. I believe it was in the Ukraine, but it was around climate change protesters that were protesting how we're all going to die from climate change if something doesn't get done about climate change. So these people were protesting in the body bags. They weren't actually pretending to be dead soldiers or dead citizens in the current Russian Ukraine conflict. And I think that video clip, if I remember correctly, was from like 2017, 2018. And yet, again, this media hoaxing has caused a lot of people to use it as proof that the Ukraine conflict's fake, or that the media is trying to get us into a bigger war than what's currently going on with that conflict. So yeah, Adam, hot take when it comes to media hoaxes.
Yeah, no, I think it's very dangerous, especially because I think we're living very busy lives right now, and I think the general prevalence in culture right now is to have very quick, short attention spans, and so people don't often actually click past the title. And so the example you gave was especially dangerous when we're kind of seeing a bit of a bait and switch. And as soon as you had said that, I actually thought you were going to bring up another story, because there are many examples of this, about there were claims this year, in the past year or so, when COVID was at its peak, that ivermectin was causing hospitals to be lined up, and people with gunshot wounds were dying in the hospitals because they couldn't possibly get treatment because all these people were overdosing from ivermectin. Of course, that's not possible. Ivermectin, you'd have to take in such incredible doses to have that thing. And then when they dug a little bit deeper and started disproving some of these claims, they found out that, much like the example you gave, the photos were actually from a completely different year and time. And it was pointed out very quickly by consumers of this that, like, hey, it's the middle of summer in Oklahoma. Why are these people in the photo wearing jackets? And
Mhm.
and so I do think, though, that when an article like that gets posted, people are, it appears as if they're more likely to read the headline and repeat the headline than they are to actually click in, inform themselves, read through the whole article. And that's where I think this becomes very dangerous.
Yeah, and it ends up putting like, it's so hard these days to trust anything you see on social media because some of these deep fakes, these media hoaxes, fake news being propagated so far and wide. And you almost have to become like an investigative journalist or a detective in order to try and get to the bottom of it. However, when it comes to media hoaxing and fake news and things of that nature, I think that there is a few things for us to distinguish. But before getting into that, Kim Capria, I should say, of the fact-checking website Snopes.com has stated that in America, fake news is a bipartisan phenomenon, saying that there has always been a sincerely held yet erroneous belief that misinformation is more red than blue in America, and that has never been true. And so, first things first, what I just wanted to highlight with this comment is it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. All of us are uh, capable to falling, and I'd almost guarantee all of us have in the past fallen for fake news or media hoaxes. However, I think that it is important to distinguish. I see there being different types in regards to media hoaxes. And a few examples that maybe some of us are familiar with are, outlets like The Onion, Babylon Bee, and then the Ferryman's Toll is probably a little bit less familiar with you guys, but I'll share that in a second. Now, in my humble opinion, I don't have issues with things that are known as satirical news. So, like The Onion, Babylon Bee, they own the fact that, like, this isn't real news, right? And someone that reshares a story from The Onion or Babylon Bee, I kind of feel like that's almost on you, right? And you're just showing, like, your political bias and how extreme it is. The fact that you wouldn't even look and be like, oh yeah, it's from the Babylon Bee or the Onion. Like, they don't claim to be real news. However, there's another version of this, and I'm going to frame it as deep fake news. And an example of it, in my opinion, is the ferryman's toll. And so this is a content creator here in Canada. He's well known kind of on the right of center political spectrum. He's got a Telegram group, a YouTube channel, things like that. But probably the stuff that you see most often with him is news articles like this from CBC News. So I'm just going to zoom out here a little bit so you guys can, well, maybe not, see the entire article. But the headline reads, and it looks like a legitimate news article, right? It's very hard to tell whether this is or not, but experts say can mask mandates for travel could result in millions of deaths. And now I saw people actually sharing this as a legitimate CBC News article because CBC News is a real Canadian news outlet, and Mike Crawley, who's got the byline here, he's actually a real journalist for CBC, but he's never actually written this article. And the only way you could tell if it's fake is to go to CBC and review the list of all the Mike Crawley articles and confirm it's not valid. And there's been a particular Canadian journalist from Global News recently, Rachel, who's been trolled ad nausea almost at this point in time with fake news articles being attributed to her. But it's actually a lot easier than most of us would think to fall victim to this. One, because these days media is so focused on clicks that this honestly feels like it could be a real news headline, sadly, here in Canada, because CBC News will say these crazy things and go to the extreme end of the political spectrum and show their political biases often, in my opinion. However, it frustrates me to no end that things like this are created by content creators because this sort of culture jamming, I don't think it actually serves a real purpose, right? It doesn't really meet the definition of what I've laid out up until this point in time that culture jamming is supposed to be. Because you have to go so deep, or you have to already know that this is like a deep fake news article before you can start to understand or interpret the message that I would argue Ferryman's trying to make here. And what ends up happening is individuals that probably are in alignment with Ferryman's political perspective end up sharing this as if it's real news and then trying to dunk on the news outlet. And it ends up just like, decreasing the trust that any individual following that person would have because they're sharing fake news if and when it eventually comes out that this has been a doctored headline. One that I personally fell for earlier this year was there was like a CTV News article that, again, it was actually made by Ferryman's Toll. So maybe I've just got a chip on my shoulder because he effectively trolled me on this one. But it was like a headline that sounded pretty innocuous that passed the sniff test initially for me, which was, government concerned over how often conspiracy theorists are proven correct. And honestly, like, my political bias says that conspiracy theorists are more often than what mainstream media would allow us to believe proven correct, or at least to have a grain of truth behind what they're discussing or what they're putting forward as the truth. Now, again, this news headline never existed. I shared it on my Instagram story because I thought it was real news. Now, I understand you could make an argument here that this is actually a net benefit to society because it ends up, when this is disproven, that calls into question the authority and the legitimacy of anyone that chose to share it, right? It makes you kind of second guess whether you can trust them as a source of information. However, it's so often that I don't see these things being corrected when people share it on Twitter or things of that nature. And that really frustrates me because, again, I think it creates more noise and reduces the signal, right? I think it causes people just to almost want to give up when it comes to even trying to understand what's reality and what's fake news. So I guess quick hot take here, Adam. Do you see any issues with this? Do you think these like deep fake news or doctored headlines are they fine? Are they part of the game in your opinion?
I so I guess to preface my response, I am a firm believer in free speech. I do believe that if somebody like the Ferryman's Toll wants to put out something like that, they should be able to. However, I have a question for you to flip this right back to you. Are you more concerned about the fact that you fell for that headline, or about the fact that you couldn't tell if it was real or not? Like, which of those two things is more concerning? Because I think the average Canadian's not going to spend a ton of time, or even the average person, ton of time clicking through the article and then going and verifying on CBC's website. But what's worse, the fact that we don't trust and verify, or trust but verify, or the fact that it's possible that these articles are real. And I think that's some of what makes culture jamming so beautiful.
Yeah. So I definitely understand that. I think it's almost too much of a nuanced argument, though, to expect the average person to do these deep dives and do the research. So it's not the fact that I fell for it or that I could believe that the mainstream media would put out a headline. It is the fact that there's no signal here that this has been doctored, right? So if there was like a watermark, if he put his little logo in the corner of it, that to me, boom, immediately that's an effective culture jam. Where when there's no indication whatsoever that it's been doctored, that's what really bothers me about this sort of approach to culture jamming. And with that being said, I'll kind of segue here into a different example of culture jamming that I'm completely okay with. And honestly, I kind of struggle with what's really different between this version of culture jamming and the one I just highlighted with Fairman's Toll. And I think that that's a fair criticism for anyone that maybe wants to call me out on it. But Alex Stein, I personally consider him the modern culture jamming king. So first things first, Adam, have you ever came across Alex Stein?
Yes, I actually have, and I in fact saw the video of him in Las Vegas, describing to what I believe was their city council and perhaps mayor in the morning, following a night out in Las Vegas, or at least that's what
Yeah.
the message was. And he was saying, I don't generally drink, but you guys have made alcohol so accessible here, and I don't usually gamble. And he goes through this whole sort of story. And then I think one of the more dominant parts of his story that were so fantastic is he goes, but it's the only city in America I've seen where the vaccine clinics are running 24 hours. Cause I saw the people on the streets all hours of the night taking their vaccine. And I thought that was really quite fantastic.
And so, yeah, that's kind of his OP here, or his operating procedure, is that he's often trolling local governments. He's getting into these discussions. He's known as he dressed up once as a nurse and started rapping about the vaccines, right? And the Fauci ouchie and how important it was to get everyone vaccinated, and get vaccinated as often as possible. And then he's also trolled in regards to Las Vegas. He recently trolled the Oakville City Council in regards to the prosthetic breasts, which we're going to get to in a second. He's also trolled, and this is the photo here. I think this was a Texas local council, about how unfair it is that anyone calls into question his ability to dominate female sports. And he approaches all of this very tongue in cheek, but sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish exactly what is fact and what's fiction here. So I'm going to drop my screen share for a second. I'm going to reshare here with sound, and I'll play a clip for you guys, because I think this is important and interesting, because this video originally went viral, and I think a lot of people weren't sure whether he was serious or not. And similar to your question to me, Adam, part of the problem is so many people seem so completely captured by the COVID narrative. They live in such a perpetual state of fear that I could see someone actually being like this character that Alex Stein has created. Excellent. It will not let me share. Okay, here we go. I'm getting trolled by my own computer here. So hopefully you guys can hear this. And again, I think this is a really valuable video and an interesting approach to culture jamming.
Please stand up. Vaccinate your mom. Vaccinate your dad. Vaccinate the happy. Vaccinate the sad. Vaccinate your babies. Vaccinate them, even if they got rabies. Vaccinate my life. Vaccinate my wife. Vaccinate your DNA. Vaccine created the CIA. Vaccinate your body. Vaccinate me at the party. Vaccination freak. Vaccination freak a leak. I want the vaccine in my life. I want the vaccine for my wife. I want to vaccinate you all day long. Vaccinate you while I wear my thong. Vaccinate me. Vaccinate who? Vaccinate she. Vaccinate her.
So that's just an example of Alex Stein's approach when it comes to culture jamming. Again, there's dozens of videos you can find. He's been on, Tucker Carlson, interviewed by all kinds of political pundits on the right. And I do think it's effective. I think that this gets shared more widely than had he put together a well thought and argued political commentary on how just obsessed people seem to be with making sure that everyone else gets vaccinated, and views no other sort of approaches, right? Whether that's physical health, vitamin D, different factors, considering your individual risk factors and things of that nature. So that was in front of the Dallas City Council, that specific one. But I just, it's fascinating his approach here. And I think that we're going to see a lot more copycats in the future. And specific here, when asked about his approach to culture jamming, Alex Stein has commented, "Everyone sees nurses dancing on TikTok, so it's not that absurd," he says. "I want people to see my video and not know whether or not it's real. Questioning is almost as good as laughter. People need to ask questions." And there's something very Kaufman-esque about this, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of Andy Kaufman, and those of you that haven't, gone down the rabbit hole, really encourage you to watch the movie about Andy Kaufman called Man on the Moon, starring Jim Carrey. There's as well a documentary about the making of it, which I think is Andy and Jim is the name of that documentary that you can watch on, I believe it's Netflix. But Andy Kaufman was this comedian, this political commentator that essentially started wrestling women back in, I think it was the 70s or 80s. And, when asked about why he liked wrestling women, he'd say, "Oh, they're so much weaker than me. It's so much easier to beat them up. And, I feel so much more powerful," and all these kind of silly trolling things. And yet, part of me feels like we almost live in that society again today, where we're seeing, individual, like biological males competing against biological females and appearing to, at least on the surface, in my opinion, have a natural advantage over a lot of those individuals. And yet, we're so concerned about mainstream media, the narrative, right, being on the right side of PC culture, that no one's really willing to explore or discuss the fact that maybe the emperor's not wearing any clothes. Maybe this isn't the right approach. And building upon this, I'd be shocked if anyone that's been on the internet in the last couple of weeks hasn't at least seen some of these photos. But this is a photo, this is a real photo, this is not doctored or fake news, of a Ontario school teacher in a shop class. And these are the prosthetic breasts that he is wearing while teaching these children. And it it blows my mind. And originally, I thought that this was probably culture jamming. And there's some conspiracies that maybe this is. Other people believe this is a legitimate individual trying to express themselves and their believed identity, right, or how they identify with themselves. But this straddles the line so much that I think it's almost impossible to truly determine whether this is effective culture jamming or not. And one of the conspiracy on why this is culture jamming is some previous students of this teacher have said that he's red pilled, that he's often dropping, discussions and topics and explorations of ideas that would go against, PC culture. So who knows? Hopefully we'll eventually get an answer to this. But to me, it's fascinating to see this playing out. And in my opinion, there really is two approaches to this, right? There's a sincere individual who believes wearing giant prosthetic breasts is part of living in alignment with their true identity, or it's a perfectly executed culture jamming commentary on how our institutions have been completely captured by woke ideology and identity politics to point that they cannot point out the emperor is not wearing any clothes, or in this case, that it's absurd to subject high school students to weird sexual fetishes. And, immediately once this kind of broke out and went viral, we saw people protesting at the school. We actually saw, believe it or not, the Ontario education minister saying, "Hey, maybe school boards should re-examine dress policies for teachers." And there's no way we would have ever heard that had it not been for these video clips going viral, right? For a few of these photos popping up. And when asked for comment, the school responded. And again, this to me is a perfect example of how woke culture has captured a certain aspect of our society. "We strive to promote and support a positive learning environment in schools consistent with the values of the school board," continued the statement, "and to ensure a safe and inclusive learning and working environment for all students, staff, and the community, regardless of their race, age, ability, sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, cultural observance, social economic circumstances, or body type or size." So the school also has pointed out that its dress code only applies to students. Dress codes must prevent students from wearing clothing that exposes or make visible genitals and nipples. And yet, this teacher with their prosthetic breasts is very clearly, showing off their nipples. I don't really think there's too much of a discussion to be had there. And so this to me just like raises a few questions that I want to explore with you, Adam. And I'd love to have our audience as well. Either jump in the live comments right now, comment if you're watching the replay of this video, or best, join our Substack and leave a comment on this Substack article, or join our Telegram group and share with us your thoughts and opinions. What's your thoughts on culture jamming? Have you ever had a meme change your mind or cause you to completely question a position or view that you believe to be settled? Who's currently crushing it at culture jamming, in your opinion? And do you know of any resources that teach you how to participate or improve at culture jamming? Because, like I said, this teacher is either playing 4D chess or there's actually unintended consequences to their decision to essentially display themselves in this manner. And I personally think the jury's still out here, but we find ourselves in fascinating times where school boards, where those that essentially are put in positions of power over children, um, deem this as acceptable behavior. What are your thoughts here, Adam?
Yeah, Matt, I literally had never considered the angle that it was possible this was a culture jamming activity. But when you lay it out, it actually could make a lot of sense. Like, if this guy's really trying to push an agenda, this is shocking. It's absurd. It is challenging probably the beliefs and value systems of the parents at that school and to other members of the school board that are decision makers. And I think I mean, if that is what's happening here, that is an incredible risk to take on that individual's behalf, but also like a very interesting way to change somebody's mind. I mean, that's very different, in my opinion, than some of the other things that we looked at, like, say, for example, the billboard that you showed us, or even the Banksy portrait. The ability to use your body or use the real physical world to do this too is definitely another level of this, and very shocking. I mean, when I first saw these articles, I was like, wow, this is mental health. This is a bad mental health issue, and certainly inappropriate if nothing else. But you just actually perhaps changed my mind a bit, that if this was culture jamming, like, what an effective tool. Because I think, to your point, there's no way we would have ever had those conversations like, hey, we need to censor or address this dress code with the teachers. And I'm sure there would be many other examples of things that may come across as sacred cows, right? Things that we're not allowed to touch in society.
Exactly. That term sacred cow's perfect, right? Because we see this woke orthodoxy, right? This woke narrative throughout society that you're not allowed to question. And honestly, like, let's put our tinfoil hat on here for a second. Assume that this guy is literally the new Alex Stein. He's a culture jammer playing at level 1000. You know, what other options did he maybe have available? Well, he could have probably written a letter to the school board. He could have started a petition. He could have tried to protest himself. And honestly, I suspect any of those measures probably would have got him at least an infraction, disciplinary hearing, or potentially literally removed or fired as a teacher. Whereas instead, like Alex Stein, he takes, the woke narrative or cultural Marxist or identity politics, whatever you want to frame this as, and takes it to its natural, most extreme conclusion possible, presents that to society, and essentially challenges society. Are we okay with this? And I think it really causes a lot of us to think, like, reflect on it. Because had you asked me, like, if there's a trans teacher, should they be able to represent themselves or live in alignment with their identity? On the surface level, I'd be like, I think people should be people. And so, like, everyone, there's a wide spectrum of individuals out there. And if they're not really causing harm to children, like, yeah, let them do you. And yet when I see it framed this way, I'm like, I don't know. My spidey sense is something just inherently in me is like, whoa, let's pump the brakes here for a second and really think about the society that we want, right? Like, should this individual be able to take it? And, I've seen other individual political pundits like Tim Pool on his show explore it even further. Okay, well, let's say that this individual or a different individual identifies as having like a 3-foot long dick, and they decide to wear a giant prosthetic that like shows through their pants all day long. And let's say instead of a high school teacher, maybe they're a preschool teacher. Is there any issue with that? And again, if nothing else, this is sparking a discussion and a debate that I think is important to society and something that we should be going eyes wide open into rather than simply like hiding in fear from the woke orthodoxy.
Yeah, I think it's all too easy to, in theory, agree with some of the notions that we want to socially, and perhaps there's good reason behind it. Again, like, I think is going to become a common theme on this show is that I think with the best intentions, people are setting out to say, yeah, we should accept differences amongst each other and whatnot. But I think when the rubber hits the road, it's like, okay, well, should this teacher identifying as a female be able to be in the women's change room now? Should other students who are identifying that way, like, sure, maybe it's fine to dress like that, but is it fine then for them to be in the change room, in the bathroom, playing sports against other people of that same sex? And it's like, man, I think that's where we ask some real questions. And if this is level 1000 culture jamming, I mean, what an incredible way to do it. And I think one of the things you mentioned there, Matt, that I thought was very brilliant is just like taking it to the natural extreme. And I think that's where we actually discover whether or not ideas make the most sense, right? If we can take something to its furthest conclusion, I believe that that's a little bit of foreshadowing, right? It's a little bit of a thought experiment to see where this could possibly go. And I think this is an interesting mental exercise for anybody consuming this content right now, is like, some of the things that we believe are different thoughts. Like you brought up abortion during the show, and sexual, genders or things like that. Like, what is the extreme, right? And I think there's some really great questions, like with the abortion question, at 9 months or at 8 months, is this something we should be doing? And it's like, whoa, I mean, that's perhaps a different question than is it possible to do day 1 or 2? But that question provokes you to think, well, is there really a difference? Right. And then all of a sudden you start asking these different questions, and you have to think a little bit harder about what we may assume is just a given thought or belief that aligns with our value systems. And I think this is really fantastic, Matt. I mean, I really didn't know what to expect with this discussion, because I honestly had never really heard of culture jamming. I certainly hadn't thought of it in that way, but we have seen the rise of meme cultures and the shareability of ideas with the internet and how connected people are these days. And I do believe that these tools and these tactics are going to become used more often. So I'm definitely excited that we had this conversation. And I think this goes both ways. Perhaps culture jamming is an effective tool for people that are consuming this to think about, for how could they have people understand their ideas from a different angle. But it's also a great place to start for us to understand that, like, these types of messaging and these types of things are happening to us. And if we're consuming these things without really understanding them, that's how we can find ourselves in the place where you were with the ferryman's toll strategy, where we just don't even understand it's happening to us. So, man, great exploration. There's one, just before I hand this back to you, there's one example of culture jamming that I was able to find actually during the show, because I was looking up something for you. And I just find this one particularly powerful. So I'm going to put it on the presentation right now. Here is a great example of culture jamming. So it's taking Nike's logo. If you're watching this at home or driving, it's taking Nike's logo, and Nike's slogan is, of course, just do it. And what I'm looking at here and what I'm showing on the screen is an example of culture jamming, where they've taken the Nike logo and put it, that swoosh, they've put it inside of a hand, and they've got the slogan, just do it. And attached to that, they've got this kind of ball and chain, and it says, or else. And the Nike swoosh is kind of looking very menacing and perhaps like a weapon falling down on the just do it slogan. And I mean, wow, that's a powerful thought, because perhaps you've heard, the rumors that Nike's not using the highest paid labor, and perhaps they're working in
I think we can go beyond rumors. Yeah.
Okay. They're working in unfavorable conditions and perhaps slave labor. And wow, to communicate it like that, where the swoosh is like a weapon and the or else is a ball and chain. I mean, that paints everything you need to see. And maybe it's things like this that can help us to make more informed decisions as consumers. So I definitely think this is a powerful talk, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's important subject matter. And the last thing I guess I want to leave everyone with is, when I think about culture jamming, when I think about meme culture, I can't help but think about the court jester. And so for anyone that's never really gone down this rabbit hole of thinking, understand that the court jester was this individual that essentially could call into question, could make fun of the king. And what the reason this was so important arguably to society is it acted kind of as both a like pressure relief valve as well as a check and balance, because the court jester could say things and do things that no one else in court would be capable or allowed of doing, right? So the king, or like the supreme leader, would always be untouchable. However, the comedian, the court jester, is able to poke and prod and make fun of things. And one, there's a certain catharsis there just for society in general. But secondly, you know, if you want to understand who has power over you, simply look towards like who you cannot question, right? Who you cannot speak against. And one of the few remaining facets available to us in society is usually through the means of humor. And so again, I think that that's why culture jamming, meme culture, all the stuff, viral videos we've talked about today is so important, because there are a lot of orthodoxies that, are at face value, at least in society, assumed to be self-evident and unquestionable. And it's only through subversion, through parody, through humor that we're ever actually going to be able to fully explore this subject matter. And it's important. I'm a free speech absolutist. I think people should be able to say and essentially do anything they want, short of like violence or direct calls to action of violence, or that would immediately cause direct harm, right? So like shouting fire in a crowded building when there is no fire, causing a stampede and causing people to die. Yep, that's probably a step too far from a free speech perspective. Everything else should be free game, in my opinion. And that's why I think, and that's why I wanted to share with you guys the importance of culture jamming. So again, appreciate it, Adam. I'll leave everyone with one last question here before we jump off the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you're subbed on the platforms we've talked about. Smash that like button. Leave us a comment. It really does, if nothing else, mean a lot to us. And we appreciate that. But are you guys okay with this person teaching your children? Are you okay with this person, leading a high school class? And I think if it wasn't for this photo, if it wasn't for this sort of display of it, a lot of people would have assumed point blank yes. But it's important that, if nothing else, again, you may come to the conclusion that this is completely acceptable. And I think that that's, within your own rights to make that decision. However, let's at least have the conversation. Let's be free to have the conversation. And if you don't feel like if you feel like there's an important subject matter that you're not free to discuss, maybe you should consider subverting the mainstream orthodoxy. Maybe you should consider getting involved with meme culture and culture jamming, because these are important conversations, or at least I absolutely believe them to be so. And again, appreciate everyone watching this video.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate all of you watching. And I think maybe a great introduction as well to some more fun culture jamming is just through the act of listening to some of our greatest comedians. I find stand-up comedians are some of the ones who do this the best, by reframing problems in different ways and making us laugh at things that we generally perhaps think of in a different way. So absolutely appreciate all of you guys. And we're going to leave you at that. We'll see you tomorrow. We've actually got a fantastic show programmed for you about dog training. Sounds a little bit random, but a lot of you have dogs. Okay. They're one of the most popular things to have as a pet. And I assume that a lot of people watching this might have a dog. And tomorrow I'm going to be leading the show and talking to you guys about why it's not your dog. It's actually probably you that's making the mistakes. Okay. These things are very trainable, and there are some great best practices. So we're going to be sharing some stories about dogs that we've had in our lives. We're going to be sharing some best practices on how to get them trained up. And I'm even going to share some tips for you as to how to own dogs and still maintain and have the best day ever. So very excited to talk to you guys about that. And again, just remember, we're trying to get 1% better every day. So join us in the conversation in trying to do that. Post to us in the Telegram chat. Let us know what you're doing today to be best. Have your best day ever and how you're getting 1% better. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Cheers.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die, cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die, cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.